Our value added, if you will, is that Lisa and Tori and LCRG is available to Laurel families 24/7, 365 days a year, and to our guests on evenings like this. And so we are happy to welcome those of you who are new to Laurel, and we are thrilled to have this available for our own parents. Parents, you'll notice that all of LCRG is behind a parent-only password now, because we know it's really exciting, and we want you to be the people who get to use it with your daughters. So that's a change this year that I hadn't announced, but it is part of our strategic roadmap, and we're thrilled. Tonight, Lisa and Tori have prepared what I think is the topic for girls, and maybe for grown-ups. And I hope, and I know actually, that they are going to put the world's best research to work for girls and for those of us who love them. And just bad news for those of you parenting Laurel girls, you know, it doesn't end. My two are 22 and 24, and I brought a notebook tonight because every time I listen, I pick up just a few more tips for those Laurel alumni, of whom I'm so proud, who call the 216 home, and also for the 13-year-old boy who lives in my house, who is really quite an enigma to me. Nonetheless, I suspect that while we are proud to be an all-girls school after the age of 5, I always feel like I learned something from my parenting of my young man as well. So without further ado, I give you Lisa Damour, Executive Director of Laurel Center for Research on Girls.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you all for being with us this evening. I want to start by thanking the Laurel's Parents Association, Laurel School Parents Association, who sponsors this event for us twice a year. And 10 years ago, when LCRG began, at some point in the year, a parent approached me and said, you know, there's some parents who would really love to read some research papers. Could you find one and we could sit and read it together? And that began a tradition where about 8 really nerdy parents and I sat around and read research papers. And to make it nice, the LSPA parent at the time brought some wine and some cheese and made it lovely. And LSPA has borne with us and brought more wine and more cheese as this has just ballooned. And so we are eternally grateful for how much work is involved in putting events like this together. And Andrea Nelson, who is the support for LCRG, we would not function without her. So thank you, Andrea. Okay, so I'm going to give you an overview of our evening, and then we're going to take it from there. I'm going to begin with the science on stress and anxiety, and talk about what we know and what we can do about stress and anxiety in broad strokes. And then I'm going to turn it over to Tori, the research director for LCRG, who is going to talk in specific terms about research that we have done here that has been published in journals, national journals, and especially around a recent research study that has real bearing on what it means to be a student in a school like this, and to parent a student in a school like this. You saw that there are 2 handouts on your seat. These are 2 things we're going to talk about in detail tonight. I hope that you also, it looks like the tables may be cleared. We put a ton of literature that we have addressed topics related to stress and anxiety in great detail in many ways. So I hope you also sort of peruse what's available out there. All right, so let me start with the bad news. Okay? Anxiety and other stress-related disorders are on the rise for girls. And this is something that if you talk to people in schools, and when I talk to fellow clinicians, we're like, gosh, it just feels like we're seeing a ton of this, you know? And then you think, oh, maybe it always feels that way, that whatever you're in somehow feels worse than it was. But when we actually look at the data, we do see a trend where girls are showing higher rates of stress and anxiety. So in the 80s, roughly 12% of girls were reporting symptoms of anxiety, and at the turn of the millennium, it was up to 30%. So that's a really dramatic jump. The other thing we're seeing is we don't see the same trends in boys. In the 80s, boys were roughly around 5%, and they have gone up, but they've gone up to about 13%, so they've gone up to where girls were in the 80s. So we're seeing this trend, but most of the weight is being carried by girls. Okay, so what's going on? One thing we know, and this is sort of one of those universal psychological truths, when girls are in distress, they are more likely to internalize that distress. Boys are more likely to externalize it. Put in layman's terms, girls are more likely to collapse in on themselves, boys are more likely to act out. So distress is distress is distress. It's more a question of pathway. So boys are more likely to get themselves in trouble, to bug the kid next to them, to stop turning in their homework. Girls are more likely to ruminate, to grind, to become depressed, to worry about things when they are anxious. So we do see, under stressful conditions, we see boys act out more and get themselves in more trouble, but it doesn't take the form that we do see in girls. I don't have to tell you that social media is a player in this. It is very taxing. Here's the thing I want you to say. I know there was an article in The Atlantic that got a ton of play lately and terrified parents about how dangerous and damaging social media may be for our young people. I want you to know that in the academic community, there was a lot of blowback about that article because it's all correlational data. There was no evidence that actually proved the connection between social media and some trends we're seeing in teenagers. Of course, you think it's kind of a funky coincidence, but still, I want you to know that article sort of played, I think, more to fear than to anything that we have really solid evidence for in the scientific side. That said, there is some science that I think is worth knowing. So, getting away from straight correlational studies, just sort of coincidental findings, a recent study in Child Development, which is one of our major journals, did do a longitudinal look at kids getting cell phones, the impact on their sleep, and then the impact on their mental health. And they were able, in some ways it's like, duh, of course, but they were able to prove that the earlier kids got cell phones and the way kids used their cell phones, if it was in the bedroom, if it was keeping it up, interfered with sleep, which then did lead to greater mental health problems. So, what's important about this is girls get less sleep than boys. And that's true without social media. One of the things we see is that when kids hit puberty, they sleep less because puberty makes it easier for them to stay awake later. Girls hit puberty 2 years before boys, so this becomes a bigger problem sooner. So social media, especially social media that keeps them up at night, is a real problem. Okay. The other thing we see is we do see more cyberbullying among girls than among boys. So we worry that that's a factor too. Okay, the last thing, girls are killing it in every domain. Across the board, academically, they are outperforming boys. They are doing amazing things that they actually probably weren't doing in the 80s at the same rate. So what we've done is we've put a whole lot on girls' plates, but we haven't taken anything off. So that is going to contribute to stress and anxiety. Okay, now some good news, right? First of all, and I can't say this enough, stress and anxiety are often normal and healthy and protective functions. This is something that has gotten lost in the conversation. One of the things you may have noticed as I've moved into middle age, I've certainly seen it, I think many of us have seen this, we used to accept that people had uncomfortable feelings. They used to not be something that terrified us. And there's been a trend in the culture that if you're unhappy or you're uncomfortable or if your kid's unhappy or your kid's uncomfortable, something's really wrong. And that is actually not how psychologists think about this. The way we think about all mental distress is the way we think about physical health, which is healthy people get sick and healthy people get better. So we know someone's mentally healthy if they become upset and they recover, right? In the same way we know someone's physically healthy if they get the flu and they get better. We worry that something's wrong if somebody becomes upset and they cannot recover. In the same way we worry if somebody gets the flu and it starts a downward course of medical distress. But there has been a shift in the culture where there's a sense of any anxiety at all is a sign of a problem. And the reality is anxiety is a normal and healthy function that we all have, and it keeps us from doing things like getting hit by buses. So we're all for anxiety often. Even when anxiety and stress reach unhealthy levels, there's a ton we can do. And it's funny, Tori and I have been clinicians for a long time, and we've both noted that how we talk and think about anxiety on the clinical side does not match how the culture talks about it. On the clinical side, we're like, oh yeah, we totally know how to treat anxiety. We're actually great at treating anxiety, and we've been great at it for about 10 or 20 years. In the culture, there's this sense of my kid has anxiety, now what do we do? And we're like, oh, we know exactly what to do. So let me tell you a little bit about what we know. So, in terms of anxiety being a healthy function, anxiety is there to alert us to threats. It's our internal alarm system. It was laid down by our cave person ancestors. And the way that we want to think about this is the cave person who saw a saber-toothed tiger and took off running is much more likely to have passed their genes down to us, right? Right? Than the cave person who saw a saber-toothed tiger and was like, hey, that's a cool tiger, right? We don't have those genes. So anxiety is a gift from our ancestors. It is a gift from our ancestors. We don't talk about it this way. This is absolutely something we've known for a long, long time. So we want anxiety because it alerts us to threats. Okay, so not too many saber-toothed tigers in Shaker, but you do have wild parties, right? I am saying to the girls all the time, your anxiety is your friend, right? I get to be with all the 9th graders every year and I get to talk with them about all of the risk stuff and I'm like, you guys, your anxiety is your friend. If you show up at a party and it feels wild and it feels out of control and you get anxious, that's awesome. I want you to listen to that anxiety and call your mom, right? That's anxiety doing its job. We also have threats like tests, right? And kids talk a lot about test anxiety. And one of our pieces that we have that we've written a while back is about test anxiety. And so if this feels like something you're hearing about in your home, I hope you'll pick it up. But if your daughter says to you, I have a test and I feel really anxious, your first question should be, did you study? Did you study? You will be surprised how often the answer comes back, well, no. And you say, I'm so glad you're anxious. You're having the right reaction. You should be anxious. You're not ready. Really, really. And then she says, yes, I studied. Your next question is, how did you study? And she says, I highlighted my text and I reread my notes. And you say, you should be anxious. Those are the absolute worst ways to study. This is something we teach girls at Laurel all the time. I often go on to say, the day that you are going to be tested on your capacity to highlight a text and reread your notes, you will kill that test. Until that day, you need to do sample testing, practice quizzing. That is how you study for a test. So to a degree, for a lot of kids, they're anxious because they're actually not well prepared for tests. And we have a whole science that we orient girls to here at Laurel about how to really prepare for a test. Okay, so say that a kid is anxious. It feels very out of control for them. Here's something that I think is incredibly cool about anxiety. As out of control as it can feel, it's actually a very systematic and predictable process. And we teach the girls here about this, because when you know what's happening, it's a lot less scary. So the first thing that happens in anxiety is that there's a physiological component. This is kind of from your gut. This is from your caveman gut that this gets started. And basically it begins with a whole lot of stress hormones getting dumped into your bloodstream. Your heart rate goes up, your breathing deepens, your airways widen, your pupils dilate. And all of these things happen so that you can run from a saber-toothed tiger. Like that is actually that programmed system of sending oxygen to your muscles and your muscles being ready to run and your pupils being able to just see which trees you're not going to run into and all of those things. The body does that, the heart rate, everything. Then the next thing that happens is we tune in to that physiological response and we interpret it emotionally. So when your heart rate goes up, you're like, I'm scared. And we actually think there's a very little distinction for us between the biology and the emotional sense, but we often think the biology leads off. So then people think like, I'm terrified. And maybe this is a child sitting at a test. The next thing that happens, so it goes from the gut, the caveman gut, which has all of this sort of biological stuff programmed, to the heart, which interprets it. Oh, I must be scared. Then the head gets involved, the cognitive side. I'm gonna fail this test, right? I'm never gonna make it. I'm not going to college. I'm gonna live in my parents' basement forever, right? Like those kinds of things start to happen. The last piece is a behavioral piece, where the kid's like, I give up. I'm putting my pencil down. I'm gonna leave the room. I can't take this test today. The behavior gets into it. So from gut to heart to head to action. This is how anxiety works. The cool thing is we can intervene on every single level. Whether it's kind of garden variety anxiety or severe anxiety, we use the same approach. So at the gut level, the physical reaction, you can actually short circuit that caveman response with relaxation breathing and muscle relaxation. We teach this to all the girls at Laurel. We talk with them. You can get your hand on the anxiety dial and turn it down. We'll show you how to do it. I have taught all the 9th grade girls my favorite breathing techniques and made them do it with me. Then, the emotional reframing. Girls walking into tests who feel that kind of, jazz in their system and start to feel things amp up, we say to them, you're not scared, you're amped, you're ready, you're jazzed, you're here to play, right? Reframing it as a little bit excited, a little bit interested, a little bit ready to do this. And we say, we don't want you relaxed on the way into a test. If you're too relaxed, you don't care, right? We want you to care. You should feel some anxiety, and that reframing really helps. Sometimes girls need help with cognitive restructuring, right? I'm gonna fail this test. Okay, no, wait, slow down. Did you study? Yes. Okay, did you do well on the practice test? Yes. Okay, so the chances are you're not gonna fail it. You may not crush it, but you're not gonna fail it. Cognitive restructuring is delicate because you don't want to overcorrect. If you say to her, no, you're gonna do amazing, any of you have met a teenage girl like, no, I'm not, right? Like, it doesn't work. But the goal of cognitive restructuring is to bring reality back into the picture. And then finally, we prevent avoidance. The other way we talk about it is we promote exposure. So let me rest on this for a minute. If there's anything you remember from tonight, it's these 3 words. Avoidance nourishes anxiety. Okay? Avoidance nourishes anxiety. This is how it works. If I'm scared of something, I want to avoid it. When I do that, I actually double down on being anxious. So imagine I'm afraid of dogs, and there's a dog walking down the street toward me. And my caveman gut gets going, my heart rate gets going, I start to become scared, and I cross the street. So I've just avoided the dog. Okay, 2 things happen in that moment. The first thing is I feel way better, right? The second I'm across the street, the caveman response goes away, my relaxation comes back in. This is a profoundly reinforcing experience. It's like, okay, that's great. The answer is definitely avoid the dog, right? I feel way better. The other thing that happens is I never meet a friendly dog, right? That might have been a great dog, a perfectly reasonable dog for me to meet, but I will never know. So every time I see a dog thereafter, I am that much more compelled to avoid it, and I'm that much less open to the possibility that it could be a nice dog. So when you have a daughter who wakes up and says, I can't go to school today, I am terrified of that test, you say, let's get your shoes on, right? Let's get in the car. We gotta go in. We can call them and tell them you're worried about the test. And then this is something we actually work very well with on families, and we talk about a lot on the Laurel side. We don't do avoidance if we can help it, right? We do baby steps. So we may say, you know what, why don't you go in there and just sit with the test? Why don't you touch it? Why don't you see if you can do the first 3 questions, right? And we're teaching her relaxation techniques, we're helping her do it. This is the #1 way to keep a small anxiety from turning into a gross monster big anxiety, is actually not allowing avoidance. The hardest part of this as a parent is this goes against everything in your gut, right? Everything in your gut is that you want to protect your kid. So when she is saying, I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it, honest to goodness, you have to tell yourself, get on the horse. Get back on the horse. That is really the lesson here. Avoidance nourishes anxiety. They have to get back on the horse. And when we have girls who feel this way at Laurel, there's nothing we like doing more as a school than trying to figure out, well, what's the baby step? What can we do so she can come in and start working on this, and this anxiety doesn't get bigger than it has to be. Okay. Stress. Let's talk about stress. Stress is a normal and healthy function, and stress comes with growth. I am saying this to the girls all of the time. We want you to learn and grow and get stronger and be amazing by the time you graduate. We can't get you from here to there if we're not asking you to work out a lot, mentally and otherwise, on a pretty regular basis. Here's why this is stressful. Growth equals change, and another major truth in psychology is change is stressful. All change is stressful. Good change, bad change, all of it is stressful. If your daughter is growing, if she is changing, that will be a stressful process. That means everything is going exactly as it is supposed to go. So this is important for us to know, because our girls will complain to us saying about anxiety, our girls will complain to us about stress. Our response matters. If we are frightened of those things, if we're trying to say, oh, you're anxious, well, we've got to make it stop. You're stressed, we've got to make it stop. We're actually not making it better. When they say, I'm anxious, we say, what's making you anxious? What's the threat? Okay, how can I help you address that threat? We can't be scared of their anxiety. When we are scared of their anxiety, they become scared of their anxiety, and it makes it worse. We can't be scared of their stress. When we are scared of stress, they become scared of stress, it makes it worse. What we're going for is Goldilocks stress. Not too much, not too little, just right, right? And we know that we've got Goldilocks stress when girls are able to recover. We know we've got too much if a girl cannot recover. So what ideally your daughter's life should look like, especially as she moves into the more challenging grades, is that she has very hard days, that she comes home very tired and tells you she's enormously stressed, and then she gets up the next day and she's all right. And she comes back in and we do it again. This is the ideal system for growth. No one says that growing is fun. No one says that growing is always easy. This is exactly what we're all signed up for. And one of the things that's really helpful is if the adults are okay with it, the kids are okay with it. When the adults aren't okay with it, the kids are not okay with it. So part of our job is to assess, is she able to recover? Then she's okay. We're going to help shore her up and keep going. This is how we get the extraordinary young women who graduate from this school. And so it's a delicate dance all the time. Push, grow, support, support, push, grow, support, support. You know, and we're not going to get it right every day. But in the general picture, we want to see girls growing and changing. And there is stress involved in that. Okay, sometimes though, the stress is too much. So this is on your chair. I had the pleasure, I was doing an interview for a piece I was writing, and I had the pleasure of talking to some stress researchers around the country. So first I talked to a relatively young researcher, and I get him on the phone, and I'm asking him about coping and stress and under very difficult conditions. And he says, oh, it's extraordinarily complicated. There's like 400 different variables, and they all moderate and mediate each other. It's like really, really complicated. And I was like, okay, yeah, whatever. So I hang up with him, and I get on the phone with this guy named Bruce Compass at Vanderbilt University. And this guy's like end of his career, and he's like, this is exactly my kind of scholar. So I get him on the phone, he's like, you know what? It's really simple. It's really, really simple. He said, you know the Serenity Prayer? I was like, yeah. He's like, basically that's the deal. I was like, all right, Bruce, lay it out for me. He said, when people are under chronically stressful conditions, and his entire career, I love this guy, his entire career has been looking at kids under conditions that are really rough. Kids who have cancer diagnoses, kids who have severely depressed parents. He studies those kids and figures out how to help them manage stress. So here's what he says. He says, what we do with these kids is we say to them, what can you change and what do you have to accept? Right? This is the Serenity Prayer. First, you take your stress, you divide it into two buckets. What can you change? What can you have to accept? Okay. So the first thing is, when you get to the stuff you can change, you work at it. You make a plan. You ask for help. You do something about it. So let's think of like a common, chronically stressful situation. 7th grade, right? I cannot recite the Serenity Prayer from heart, but it's something like, please grant me the wisdom to know what I can change and what I cannot, and the ability to know the difference. I think it's something in that department. Is that about right? Thank you. So, 7th grade, and I will say I actually was with the 7th grade team today. It turns out we have a really delightful, not high drama 7th grade, at least on October 3rd. But let's take the 7th grade, okay? You cannot find a cure for the 7th grade, no matter how fabulous school is. So say your daughter's really, it's a 7th grade high drama year. Okay, so what can she change, right? Maybe she can sit with, this really awesome kid at lunch. Maybe when she's home on the weekends, she doesn't interact with classmates, she hangs out with the neighborhood kids. Like, there are tactical things that can be done here. Okay. Then there's going to be a degree of things that she cannot change, right? Drama that is just going to carry on through the year that cannot be affected by anything she has power over. So the first thing you have to do, and I have to tell you, this is for me really the hard part, acceptance. I'm not big on anything that sounds really new agey, and to me that feels really new agey, but Bruce convinced me. He's like, really, there's no point in fighting it. If you've got something that is chronically stressful that you can do nothing about, you just have to say, okay, this is my 7th grade class. This is gonna be what it's gonna be for the duration of the year, accepting it. Having done that, you can do a few more things. One is that you can use cognitive reframing, right? And this is sometimes where parents step in and they say, okay, so 7th grade is always the 7th grade, and here's the really awesome news, you only do 7th grade once, right? Something like that. Or you're gonna learn a lot about human dynamics by watching, you know, those kinds of things. Then you find a way to distract yourself for the duration, right? Come home, hang out, do the things you like, set it to the side, go back in tomorrow. Or do fun and satisfying activities, things that make you happy while the thing that you cannot control carries on. Having accepted it, you work to distract yourself from it. Now, one of the pieces that we had out on the table was a piece I wrote for the Times called When a Teenager's Coping Mechanism is SpongeBob. And this is a piece that's very close to my heart because one of the real pleasures I have in my work at Laurel School is I actually get to talk with girls in very specific terms about how they like to cope. So if stress is a given, then you have to have good coping. And what I have learned over time is that all kids have ways that they cope that adults may or may not recognize as coping. And a lot of them involved going back and doing things they used to do when they were little, like watch SpongeBob, reread Harry Potter. I will say that most of our 11th graders every single year are deeply into Mulan. Though I have recently come across a bunch who have moved on to Moana, which was actually not out when they were little kids, but they like it all the same. And what I say to them is, you guys, this is a genius solution. It's like getting in a time machine where you go back to something that was really a time when life was simpler and easier and more delightful and you didn't have the PSAT breathing down your neck, and you hang out there for 30 minutes and then you go back in and face it. And so one of the things we really enjoy doing with the girls at Laurel is exploring how they like to cope. And it's really cool because it's a highly personal process and really helping girls embrace it and enjoy it and find the fun ways that they do it and supporting them in all of these really healthy, if highly idiosyncratic forms of coping that they enjoy. So I'm gonna wrap up there, but I want you to repeat with me, you don't really have to repeat with me. Anxiety is a normal and healthy function. Stress is a normal and healthy function. When the adults can embrace it as anxiety alerts us to threats and tells us to do something if we can, and stress tells us that we're growing and that that's an important part of it, when we can embrace that and feel calm and comfortable with that, and know that even when anxiety gets out of control and even when stress gets out of control, there's a huge amount we can do, we actually go very, very far in helping our daughters manage anxiety and stress much better. So I'm going to wrap up there. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Cordiano, who's going to talk about a study we did on life at school.
Sorry. Hold on 1 second. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, there we go. All right, so after Lisa's excellent primer on anxiety, I get to share a little bit of our research that has been done over the years here at Laurel. And I'm going to start with our largest study that we've called the 21st Century Athena Study. And this was done several years ago. So some of you may be familiar with this, some of your girls may have participated in this, but this may be new to some of you. Researchers Bella Yang out of Boston College and Renee Spencer out of Boston University directed a large research study here at Laurel with our girls in middle school and upper school, and also with girls at Dana Hall School in Wellesley, Massachusetts. And they tried to better understand the relationship factors that would worsen or alleviate stress, particularly amongst high-achieving girls. So if you're not familiar with the academic research, you should know that anxiety is a very widely studied topic. It's not that this isn't studied. The challenge is that much of the research focuses on populations with very specific stressors, things like extreme poverty or chronic illness, that make it difficult to fully apply those conclusions to our girls. So the difference in this study was that it looked at middle school and upper school girls from these two very high-achieving schools, and it looked at their interactions between the girls' relationships, specifically with their parents, their teachers, and their peers, and how those relationships affected their stress, their well-being, and their academic achievement. So this was a very large study that was conducted over about 18 months and followed the girls and returned to them as they got older. And the researchers have run with this. There have been findings that have already been reported in the literature that have focused on a few specific areas. Four main ones that came out of that first original study include the negative impact of parental criticism. Now, this is probably not a hugely surprising finding. When parents are overly critical of their daughters, and especially when that criticism is ongoing in nature, it tends to take a hit to the girls' self-esteem. We also see the true importance of alignment between parents' expectations for their girls and girls' expectations for themselves. And we're going to return to this one, because this one has some direct implications for how we help girls handle stress. We also look in that study, one of the big takeaways is the importance of authentic, engaged relationships with adult mentors. Now, these could be teachers, these could be coaches, these could be other adults in the community, but those relationships really matter, and it matters that they are ongoing, and there's a real sense of connection there. The next finding that has to do with peer relationships is not a surprise, and finds that those relationships cut both ways. So girls' friendships are a huge source of stress relief and really buffer her from stress and protect her. They are also a huge source of stress at times. And so that is a natural component of peer relationships, which is really good to remember when you see your daughter struggling with those relationships. And then the last big finding from that original study is one that we won't get into today, but could be its own topic, which is that the parents are stressed too. So this extends beyond the girls and extends into their parents and their parents' relationship with the girls and how they see their girls managing the enormous challenges in front of them. So the 21st Century Athena's team has also produced studies on sleep, on purpose, on mentoring and self-esteem, and on overall stress and success. And these studies have been published in a number of prominent academic journals. We're really pleased that these, the full research articles as well as the research summaries are available to our Laurel parents on the LCRG webpage. And we're going to do a deeper dive on one of these today. So the one that we're going to take a closer look at today is one that came out in 2016 and was published in the Journal of Adolescent Research. And the short title of this one is called Having It All, which I think sort of sums up this feeling that many of our girls walk around sort of embodying, that they're expected to do it all, be it all, and have it all while being cool, calm, and collected. So this particular study used interviews with girls, parents, and their teachers to determine what sources of stress affect girls right now. And four overarching sources of stress were identified. So the first is this pervasive experience of pressure to perform in all areas. And if we just sit with that for a moment and think about what that means, that girls feel this pressure to perform across the board. So in the areas that they are most passionate about, in the areas that they care less about, in the areas that they've been doing for a long time, and the areas that they are newer to. Adults are not immune to this, but by the time we reach adulthood, we generally don't feel the same pressure to be at the very top level of every single thing we do. But girls often feel this pressure to perform at this very high level across all domains. Another overarching stress for girls is this narrow definition of what it means to be successful and how they define success for themselves. The third is one that I already mentioned, which is those misaligned expectations. So what happens when a parent's expectations for a girl are here and the girl's expectations for herself are here? And this is the direction where it causes the most trouble. So ideally we see that girls' and parents' expectations are aligned, but when that's not the case, as it often is not, we see that that is an overarching source of stress. And the final overarching source of stress here is when girls are in competition with their peers. And we're going to do a closer look at this one. But this is one that girls talk about quite a bit, and it comes up in different ways for them. And it brings up a lot of uncomfortable feelings for the girls and also for adults in helping them know how to manage this. So the takeaway from this is that girls are swimming in stress, and not all of it is bad, but we need to equip them with the right life preserver to manage the situation. And here's where we can take the research from this longitudinal study and really drill it down to how we help them on any specific day with each of these that they are facing. So the handout on your seat, the one that's entitled Having It All, goes through a number of these scenarios, and we're going to hit four of them pretty closely today. We'll hash those out. Our Laurel faculty are also heavily involved in discussions about this and collaborating with each other and with the girls around which of these come up at school and how they come up and how we can support them when they occur. So know that that's something that's happening here. Okay, so the first that we'll talk about, the stress Olympics. So the finding here is that girls believe that extreme stress is a necessary byproduct of working hard enough to achieve at the level that she desires. So if she wants to be achieving at a certain level, she needs to be working so hard that she is experiencing extreme stress. Okay, so what are the solutions? How do we help girls manage this? Well, the first is that we go back to everything that Lisa said about stress being a helpful, healthy part of the human experience, and helping girls understand that not all stress is bad stress. Stress in moderate amounts is actually a sign that a girl is working at an appropriate level of challenge. We worry when girls are not at all stressed. Clinically, in my practice, when I see girls or boys coming in and there's no stress about school, about social situations, about anything, that's often a red flag. It can be a cause for alarm. Extreme stress, the kind that interferes with sleep and leads girls to breakdowns and has her falling apart and not able to get back up, is not necessary, and it is certainly not helpful to achieving that level of success that she desires. So we start by educating girls that actually a moderate amount is healthy. Here's how we discern between healthy and unhealthy stress. And then if we see that girls are dealing with an undue amount of stress, or even struggling to manage an appropriate amount, here's how we can help them. The first is that we do not just talk about self-care and building in time for recovery, because girls are really expert at knowing the difference between what the grown-ups say and what the grown-ups are actually doing. So they need to see us doing things like going to bed a half hour early instead of staying up to read 2 more chapters or scroll another half hour through Facebook. They need to hear us say, boy, this has been a really killer week at school, so I need to make sure I get myself to yoga tomorrow so I can kind of reset. So they actually need to see that taking place. And then they can benefit from conversations with their parents around how do they make that happen in their day-to-day life. So here's an important caveat. If you're talking with your daughter about time for recovery, and she says there is no time for recovery, that should be a cause for pressing pause and looking at her schedule, and really helping her identify where might there be little pockets of time that she can use, and if there is truly not, how do we help her carve that out? So this came with from the expert advice of Donna Levine, who's one of our learning enhancement consultants, and she came to us and said that this is something she was doing with the upper school girls that she was working with. She was actually having them keep track of their day and the hours in their day and how much time they were spending doing different activities to help guide them toward what classes they would select for the upcoming semester. And it really helped girls to know, okay, perhaps I can't take these 4 high-level classes and still play this sport and still do this activity and still have time to see my friends. But it helps to actually see it on paper. So if you find your daughter facing this dilemma of I just don't have time to catch my breath, go through this activity with her. Lisa started to do this here with some of the upper school girls, and it really is helpful. And it's a really good indicator for girls and parents. If there truly is no time, something's got to change. There has to be some pockets of time reserved for recovery. The next thing that we can think about with girls is how can we help them create that time by working smarter, not necessarily working longer or harder. So if you receive our monthly newsletter, and if you don't, be sure to sign up as soon as you leave today, but if you receive our monthly newsletter, the one that we sent out in September really looked at new research that has come out about studying and effective studying habits. And in particular, there were 2 good research articles that came out over the summer that helped drill down on what girls can do, or what girls and boys in this case can do, to really maximize their study time. And so the first is that they actually seek out help. They use the resources available to them. And we commonly talk with girls here about how the girls who are succeeding at the highest levels are not the smartest or getting the best grades. They are the ones that are using the resources available to them. So they are meeting with their teachers, they're finding out which of their friends are really, excelling in a certain area and working with them. They are using those resources. The second is that we encourage girls to do what's called active studying for shorter chunks of time, for more days leading up to the test. So this one takes quite a bit of planning. Once you get in the habit of it, it's easier to maintain, but it does take some planning on the front end as to how to do this. So active studying is things like looking up practice problems on YouTube and doing them. Active studying is things like making up your own quiz with your friend and quizzing each other back and forth. It moves away from the highlighting and rereading your notes that Lisa talked about. That is the demise of many students. And the last finding from this is that we encourage girls to become what's called self-regulated learners. And so this really captures that idea of metacognition, which is an executive functioning skill that we want girls to hone in their years here at Laurel. And what it involves is thinking in advance about what you want your outcome to be on a certain test, in a certain class, on a certain project. What is your goal? What do you want it to look like? And then to think about what are the steps that you can outline to get yourself there. Does it mean that you have to be meeting with your teacher more regularly? Does it mean that you have to skip time with your friends this weekend to allow time for studying? And then to be able to monitor your progress, to make sure that you are on track to meet those goals that you desire. Okay, so our next finding here from the Having It All study. It's not worth doing if she can't be the best, right? So this is where girls fall into that fixed mindset track of thinking. And this is another place where we have to be very careful about what we say and the messages that we kind of silently and inadvertently reinforce. So we really, at every turn, want to reinforce that growth mindset thinking. And this is something that we are lucky enough here to have faculty who do this day in, day out, sometimes I think without even realizing such good work they're doing in promoting growth mindset thinking. So when we think about this idea that girls believe they have to be the best in order to get something out of it, we turn to growth mindset for solutions. We ask for questions like, what are you learning from this class? How are your mistakes here helping you grow? What will you do differently next time? We have moved far beyond accepting mistakes. We embrace mistakes. We see them as this is necessary to get us to the next level. And what are your test results? If you didn't get what you wanted on that test, what do your test results tell you about how you studied best? What can you do differently next time? Research also emphasizes the role of purpose in helping girls with a number of things. When girls have an identified sense of purpose and they have opportunities to work toward that, it builds their sense of identity, it has a positive impact on their well-being, it increases their academic achievement, so all things that we want to see more of. And it can be a really nice counter to this idea that I'm only doing something because I am going to be the best at it, or if I'm doing it, I must be the best at it. So here at Laurel, our schedule allows for roughly every 8 days or so, girls in the middle school and their upper school spend their afternoons in purposeful activities. And this can look like anything from capstone to protege to visiting the food bank on a service learning trip to working on the yearbook. There's lots of different activities that this can take on. But what it has in common is it's an opportunity for girls in adolescence to figure out what they are passionate about and how they can direct that purpose in a meaningful way. And the last here is that we share stories of difficulty. It does not matter whose stories. It can be your own, and girls delight in this and hearing their parents' own sources of difficulty. And it can help them, just sort of separate what you do from enjoyment versus what you do to be the best at. Like, perhaps you will never be the most talented yogi in your class, but you really get something out of going to that class every Saturday morning. There's also really interesting research that shows what teenagers learn from reading about the success and the failure stories of high-achieving scientists and inventors and other teenagers. So no matter where those difficulty stories come from, it's really helpful to reinforce for girls that that road to success, by necessity, is long, it's winding, it's bumpy, it's filled with obstacles. Mistakes are not the exception, they're actually part of the engine that gets you there. Okay, so the next finding from this study. Girls' stress increases when their parents' expectations misalign with their own about their goals. This is something that many parents run into with older adolescents, and many adolescents will complain about, that my parents expect this, I think this is reasonable, or I'm able to do this. This is a tough one. You have to sort of be careful about how you have this conversation because you want to make it about the goal and not about your girl. And so being open to honest conversations about what are your daughter's expectations, how does she arrive at those expectations, how do they feed into her bigger goals, why do you have your expectations, and why might they differ from her own? This is not a one-time conversation. This is not a conversation that your daughter's going to tolerate for more than about 5-10 minutes at a time. So you will be coming back to it. Sometimes the expectations don't align. And here it's worth doing a couple of things. It's worth really listening to your daughter and letting her know that you are really listening and hearing and not just waiting for your turn to tell her why she should be doing this internship or taking this class. And then it's worth thinking about what might a workable compromise look like. Is there some way that you feel like she has an expectation that fits with her goals and feels manageable and still helps her meet the goals that you feel she can rise to? The last finding that we'll drill down on here is this idea of competition. And so one of the findings from this interview study was very interesting. It found that competition is pervasive, but it runs contrary to the idea of community that is present in our school. So girls do one of two things. They either take it underground in this sort of icky, prevalent, but not openly discussed kind of way of, I kind of know what you got on the test, and when you get on the test, and I know what I got on the test, and this is how I see my standing. Nobody feels good about it, but it's something that happens. Or they shy away from healthy competition. And neither of those are good options. So it's worth thinking with girls about how we engage in healthy competition and how important it is. It's helpful for girls to know when to turn it on, so when they're going into a test and they really want to crush it, or they're going out in the field for the game, and then when to dial it back and be a supportive member of the community and cheer on their peers and cheer on the girls around them. It's also worth knowing for them that working their hardest actually strengthens the community. So instead of trying to hide their strengths or pulling back from really, doing their best or working their hardest or doing the things that would allow them to shine, that actually pulls up the whole community, and it helps other girls achieve at their highest level as well. Dovetailing with our growth mindset language, we can help girls reframe their talented peers and stop looking at them as intimidating and start looking at them as inspiring. So if one of your peers is crushing it in a class that really matters to you, you can say, I'm so blown away by what you're doing. Let me in on your secrets. What are you doing? Are you doing more practice problems? Are you meeting with the teacher? Let me in on what's going on. You can look at them and see how can you learn from their success while also supporting them in their success. And the last here is a good place for us to end on, which is the emphasis that there is always enough success to go around. This is not something that's in limited supply, and when the girls around us are doing well, we are doing our best too. And so I'll stop here, and we'll turn it over to questions.
What questions do you have? We cured it? We cured stress and anxiety. Awesome. Yes?
So, I have a little child, and just have
I'm going to repeat that back for everyone to hear, which is, what about if you have an only child, right? It comes with different challenges and different expectations, and how do we kind of help only children feel like they're doing well on all of these fronts as well? What do you think?
So I think it may require a little bit more thinking through, but naturally your child's going to have lots of exposure to other situations with peers, and it may be because they haven't had those siblings to kind of bounce it around with and feel that competition, it might feel new to them. So they maybe need an extra primer in, oh no, looking around and seeing what everyone else is doing and feeling, a little bit uncomfortable around it at first. That's natural. Here's what we do with that. Here's how we can look around and be happy for other people. Here's how we can look around and learn from what they're doing and get to the goal that you want to get to. Would you add?
I think I'd add that, one of the things about being an only child is you spend a lot of time with adults, right? You're sort of accustomed to adult-level discourse. And I think that means that sometimes they can be a little bit ahead on the maturity front and a little bit impatient with peers who are schooled in the ways of coercion and control, which is what you learn from siblings. And so they can be a little bit, they haven't had to trade in that, they're not always very sophisticated in that, which is great, but it can mean that 3rd and 4th and 5th grade, they're sort of like waiting for everybody to get ready to discuss the problem, and that can sometimes make them feel a little out of step. And I think in my experience, you sort of have to reassure them that everyone's catching up. Everyone's catching up. Yeah. We've got a mic for you.
Thanks for the great discussion. As a parent of 7 and 9-year-old girls who have been in the throes of anxiety now for at least 2 or 3 years, I was hoping you could comment a little bit on the developmental aspects of this. I think a lot of your work has been with teenagers, high school students, and trying to think about how to prepare younger girls who are going to be entering into these years given that they may not fully have the tools that you're describing, that they're formative. And so maybe you could place this in a developmental perspective.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll start by saying 7 and 9 is right around the ages that we start to see, we talk about this a lot with our primary parents, that we start to see girls comparing themselves to their peers and in their minds coming up short. This person can read faster, this person can run faster, all of those things. Our instinct as parents is to reassure them how good they are and how strong they are in these areas and how smart they are. And this is a place where we can really, at the beginning, start with growth mindset language about the work you put in, the growth that you see, your anxiety is lessened when you are prepared. All of those growth mindset tools can be dialed back developmentally for 7 to 9-year-olds, for sure.
And I think just to keep going on that idea, this is a great time to get good habits in place. Before they have a ton of homework, this is a wonderful time developmentally to have a time when homework gets done, where homework gets done, and where it gets done without a lot of distractions. And that is growth mindset all day long, which is if you want outcomes, you actually have to do work. And that is tough medicine, right? It'd be awesome if you could just get all the grades you wanted without having to do work. What it does, though, is it puts the kid in the driver's seat. And when people are in the driver's seat, they feel less stressed. And the outcome we don't want in the 10th grade that we sometimes see is the girl who has no habits to speak of, right? Every day she's trying to figure out where she's going to study. Every day she's going to try to figure out when she's going to study. And lo and behold, she's not doing as well as she wants to do. And she's looking at Tori, who's shows up every day and knows what's going on and is doing well and going that's awesome, how do you do that, right? And it looks like magic. It's not magic. Tori goes home, has her spot, works there, gets it done, knows when, knows how, does it without distractions. And so I think that the JV version of that is starting good habits in place so there's a very clear connection from the jump between effort and outcome. That kids who get that are much less stressed.
I want to say one more thing about that, sleep. So dovetailing on that, the habits piece of it, a couple of years ago when LCRG really targeted sleep, we had parent focus groups, and the focus group that I led was the parent piece of it. And we had a number of middle and upper school parents, and the upper school parents said, it's too late, start early, start in first grade, get the sleep habits in place. Sleep is the closest thing we have to a magic bullet in psychology, and when that is going well, everything else, anxiety, achievement, everything is going well. And it's so much easier to do that at 7 than at 15.
All right, I'm gonna jump on that.
Okay.
So there are 2 magic bullets. And we're just, in terms of my magic bullets, what reduces stress and increases achievement? Growth mindset and sleep. Those are the 2. Those are the only 2. And if you don't know, we speak growth mindset at Laurel all the time. If it's new language to you, we have great handouts back there. So sleep. By sleep habits, we mean there should be a bedtime, there should be a routine. It should not be a surprise. There should not be so many activities that they can't get to bed at a reasonable hour. 7 to 9-year-olds start to take on activities, right? This is when things start to get busy. 7 to 9-year-olds need 10 hours of sleep. So start with the clock. You have 14 hours left after you take out those 10 hours. Then take out the school hours. Then take out the transportation time. Then take out the shower time. Then take out some relaxation time. They can do as many activities as is left. Right? That's how you decide these things. Those are tough conversations to have, especially as all these kids are doing all these really cool things. Let the clock be the bully. And then the number 1 enemy of sleep is technology. I am not a particularly prescriptive psychologist. I would say as long as you absolutely can, no tech in your kid's bedroom. And some families, if you've got 2-floor house, no tech on the 2nd floor. I mean, I would be really militant about this for as long as you can because you will lose in the end. But I would rather see you. But lose with your 16-year-old. Lose with your 16-year-old, your 17-year-old, don't lose with your 12-year-old.
So you mentioned behavior as the 4th outcome, right, of some of the anxiety and how it might show itself, and you said avoidance was one of the main things, but what are some other ways that this age group might respond when they're anxious that isn't immediately obvious to parents? Behavior-wise.
Acting like the biggest crab in the world. Yes, so when you see your otherwise temperamentally pretty even kiddo starting to act out in ways that seem sort of off the mark for them, being really rough with their siblings, or talking back to you, or shutting themselves away, and doing these things that seem out of character, the impulse can be like, shape up, what's going on? And often it is driven by anxiety. It's driven by some stressor that they either, if they're younger or sometimes older, don't have the words to articulate or haven't quite connected those dots, or it might be a conscious effort to be doing something else besides worrying about the thing that they're worrying about.
The other thing I would add to that is it is normal for teenagers and younger kids to feel that the world comes in two categories, which is things that I like and things that are a crisis, right? And when your teenager brings it home to you, especially a teenager in full bloom of adolescent freakout, they can convince you that these are also the only categories in the world. Things I like and things that are a crisis. And our job is to be like, oh, I have such good news for you. There's this massive in-between category, which is stuff you can handle, right? Actually, most of life exists in this category. So the first instinct of this is like, this is awful, I can't stand my teacher, something must be done. And our job as grown-ups is to not get caught up in that and be like, oh yeah, I've had a lot of teachers I didn't like, this is one you can handle. So to even cut that avoidance off at the pass with keeping our middle-aged selves intact. And the other thing I will say, it's very hard. The other thing I will say, it's so hard when you have a kid freaking out in front of you to know how to react in a way that's useful. My advice always is to think you have your lyrics and you have your tune. Your lyrics have to be confident and reassuring and directive. Your tune can be incredibly empathic. So I can say, Tori, I know it feels like you have the worst teacher in the world. And yet, I know how tough you are, and I think you can handle it. Like that's kind of corny, but you get the idea. You can communicate, I hear you, I care, I love you, I'm here to support you, and I am sending you back in. Say it again what I just said, like it's the lyrics, right, which is the words, which they can be legalese, right? We have paid the school, you are going to school, right? And you warm it up with a tune that is, I love you, I care about you, I'm on your team, right? That you can do the two together. Yes, I understand. School is really hard. School is really hard. And that means that they are helping you grow. I know it's not that fun. You're gonna be okay, right? Like you have to hold both at once. I'm asking you to do it, and I know this is hard. You can hold them both with those two parts.
Hi, thanks. I was wondering if you could just touch on medication. When you think it's appropriate, when to intervene with medication. Thanks.
Yeah, so a lot of the stress that we were talking about tonight is developmentally typical stress that gets quite overblown, and helping girls and parents know how to manage it. There's another category of pathological anxiety, which is a sort of separate thing. And when we see girls unable to recover from what should be kind of typical stress or feels more than typical stress, and we see them unable to use the coping tools that should help them, we would direct them to talk to their primary care physician to get a sense of, has it now tipped over into a place where they need to consult with a clinician, either a psychologist or a therapist. In the case of medication, that would either be their physician or a psychiatrist. But that is when we're looking for that, we're looking for things like impairment in functioning. They're not able to make it to school or stay at school. They're not doing the things that typically they would want to do or enjoy doing. They're pulling back from friends. They're limiting themselves in their activities because the anxiety has gotten so big.
To that I would add, I never really like seeing kids medicated if they're not also in therapy. That to me feels really important. And I think for anxiety and depression, I think I would give therapy a good college try first without medication and see if it helps. And then if it doesn't help or doesn't help enough, add in medication with the therapy at the same time. We are really good at treating anxiety with talk therapy. We are really good at it. And sometimes a kid needs to be on medication to be able to get back to school and function. And that's, missing school is a big deal and we don't want to have that happen. So we do, pull out all the stops. But the problem is when you go off the medication, the problem comes back if you actually haven't learned new strategies. So it's definitely, I wouldn't have it be the first option, and I wouldn't have it be exercise solely on its own.
When you're in therapy and it's not helping as much as it should, medication can be like the step stool underneath you to like, now I can reach these strategies, now they're available to me. So it doesn't mean that you are using those in place, it means that it actually helps you to make the best use of the therapy.
Someone.
I'm wondering what you suggest about kids who feel enough stress in school and with their peers, and then they're out and about and they're at a friend's house and the parents say, oh, you're taking the ACTs or the SATs, and what are you majoring in when you go to college? And they're 13 or 14. How do you suggest they be respectful, but tell parents, leave me alone?
I can tell you what not to say. One of my husband's friends at their college graduation, people say, what are you doing next year? He'd be like, minding my own damn business. How about you? That's a not. That's a not. That's a not. Do you have anything else?
This is a place where I think it actually helps and it's tough to be thinking about it at 13. At 16, you and your teenager can talk about like, what's your PAT response? What are you going to pull out of your pocket so that you don't even really have to think about it? You know this question is going to come up. Oftentimes it's well-intentioned but misplaced. Other times it's not so well-intentioned. But teenagers are going to encounter it, and it helps to have some sort of phrase that they have rehearsed and they can practice, and they don't have to get mired down in it in order to respond politely.
Clown college. Clown college.
Oh, clown college.
Clown college.
Yes.
Another way to think about it, and this is kind of to zoom way out. There's a concern that there's a lot of kind of individualistic focus on achievement, right? What are you doing? How are you going to succeed? Anyone who's asking a 13-year-old that question, I think, is thinking about, kid, how are you going to make it big in the world? And that may be where you're coming from. That's actually, I think, something we need to think carefully about, if that is really what we feel is the #1 priority, is that our kid be the most successful kid on the planet. And when we look at happiness and we look at outcomes, what actually makes people happy is being useful and doing things for other people and thinking in those broad ways. So one of the ways that you could kind of get out in front of this is, if this sort of aligns with your values, is talk about your hopes for your children. And when I talk with my children about my hopes for them, I'm like, I hope you make yourself really useful, right? That is my hope. And jump in.
I'm just going to jump in. At Laurel, first of all, we worked starting in the 9th grade on what to do with not so well-meaning and intrusive people. And your job as parents, and I don't care if you're well-dressed or not, is to protect your kids. Thanksgiving is a big attack. And your child doesn't know whether to pass the yams or crawl under the table. And your job is to say, hey, you know what? We don't actually talk about this in our family right now. You can be the big, bad, slightly aggressive grown-up. Your 13 or 14-year-old can't yet. So work on that. But the other thing I was going to say is, say to your girl, you can always blame the world. You can say, what I'm going to do is fulfill my promise of better world. Because that is our mission. Those are our values about being courageous, creative, ethical, and compassionate. And she can lean on those all day long. In the same way that I have taught many of you, blame all your good parenting on Laurel School. Like, you have to pay because, Laurel is so mean. You can't put that party because it's cost $30. Yes, it's true. But, sometimes you have to feel like you've got something else with you, and that is the mission and values of the school.
Why don't we do one more?
Thank you so much. Can you share with us on how you are teaching the girls on their school day, the strategies that you told us today?
Sure.
Especially from the upper school.
Yeah. So we do a lot of time with them around anxiety management, around breathing, things like that. There is a test prep process that girls go through, so they learn how to study effectively and well. Starts in middle school, goes all the way through. I was with the 9th grade today, and with half of them are talking about healthy relationships, and the other half are going and doing test prep, and we're sort of trading back and forth. We work very carefully on the coping piece, right? Helping girls identify coping, think about coping. Our girls know to talk about and think about sleep. We have made that a major priority. That has continued to be a priority for the girls. We are spending time all the time thinking with our faculty about homework, volume, load, what makes sense, what is doable, what is manageable. So it sort of feeds in a lot of different ways. I will say, for me, the greatest pride of working for Laurel is that every single girl here feels really valued. Like, I can say that 100%. Like, every single girl here knows that we desperately want her here and value her here. And that is true for our highest flyers and for our girls who are not successful in the conventional ways that people tend to celebrate. And I think that there's no greater thing we can do to help girls feel less stressed than to make it clear to them that on our good days and on their bad days and on their in-between days, they mean as much to us every single day. What do we have to do?
It's possible that I have the best job in the world. And some of that is because of the remarkable parents of extraordinary girls who have been in our school, who have been graduated from our school, who might still be coming to our school, and because I have an exceptional faculty and amazing resources in Laurel Center for Research on Girls in Lisa and Tori. So please join me in saying thank you.